Okay, it's loading.
Yeah, it's
I don't know
happening
when it
now.
starts.
No, we're live now, brother. You got to start doing the intro. We got to go right into it.
It's still loading here, so let's make sure it's working here. All right, we are live on YouTube. Clean Technica.
This is the new EVObsession live format. We're going to be doing this now, hopefully every day. That's the goal. Talking about some of the hottest EV news of the day, things that get people and things from point A to point B, and they do it with the power of electrons. I am your host, Joe Boris. Today with me, as ever, is my co-host, Zachary Shahan, who will remain in his second seat like he's been told. He already gets to be the CEO of the website. He's not taking the podcast from us either. But regardless, we're going to start off today talking about Tesla, as you always must. Whenever you talk about big EV news, and especially in North America, it's going to revolve around what Tesla is doing, especially within the supercharger and destination charger network. And they've just recently done a deal with Hilton that's going to add 20,000 Tesla destination chargers to Hilton hotels throughout North America. And I just think this is a solid move, maybe even more significant than the superchargers, because when you're on a road trip, you're on a multi-state road trip, you know you're going to stop at a hotel, you know you're going to stop at a Hilton, and it's going to give you that confidence to just plug in, finish your trip, and you know when you wake up in the morning, you're going to have a full charge.
Yeah, well, just getting the host discussion out of the way, I think it's we're
going to bicker live in front of people.
We're doing the show together. We're obviously co-hosts, but Joe wants to be the host. So I sort of feel like you want to be Conan and you want me to be Andy Richter.
You're no Andy Richter. Andy Richter controls the universe.
I am no Andy Richter. Andy Richter was a genius. Is a genius, I should say. He's still alive. Yes, Hilton and Tesla.
For now.
Yeah, we will all die one day. So Tesla, this is a very interesting situation. Well, first of all, you know, Tesla years ago was offering free destination chargers to hotels globally. And, you know, a lot of hotels took it up, you know, found out about this, got a free Tesla charger. I think it was probably a max of one per hotel. Yeah. I've used those hotels. I am really a fan of what they did, especially before the supercharger network was very expansive, very big. You know, it was just a really smart way to make sure that someone going on a road trip in a Tesla could do it without stress, because if they booked a hotel with a Tesla destination charger, they would know they could charge there overnight, whatever.
Well, and the cars were much more rare back then too. Yes. There's probably a couple thousand on the road, where now if they don't sell 1,000 in a day, something's broken.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but the situation here is obviously different, because Tesla's not giving Hilton 20,000 free chargers. They're not that generous, and not that thirsty either anymore. You know, so it's I think that policy ended anyway a while back, but now this announcement didn't come from Tesla; it came from Hilton. So Hilton is the second largest hotel chain in the world, behind Marriott, only behind Marriott. And clearly it wants to be the number one hotel chain for EV drivers. And I think this is obviously gonna be the case, unless Marriott comes out and says, we're buying 30,000 or in Trump fashion, we're buying 20,001.
Right, we're buying 20,001 and Mexico's going to pay for them. Yes. But think about this and think about what this announcement really is. If you go online and you think about who is the biggest charging network out there, outside of the superchargers, right? You think about who is the biggest, and the answer is Electrify America. If you Google right now, how many Electrify America chargers are there? The answer is 3,701 individual charging points. So with this announcement, Hilton has now announced that they are bigger than Electrify America. So we're going to have to say who has the most charging points of any charging network, and the answer is going to be Hilton. That's crazy. Last week, we were not even having a conversation about Hilton in terms of the nationwide EV charging network. We might have talked about ChargePoint. We might have talked about Electrify America. We might have talked about, EVgo. maybe, they're still pretty minor, but now Hilton, 20,000 charge points. That is insane.
Yeah. So when I was a little confused when you're talking about network, because I guess you were excluding Tesla because
because I said when you're not talking about Tesla, because outside of the supercharging network,
but I think
supercharger is the biggest.
Yeah, and I don't know what charge point is. I was trying to find charge points numbers because these are really slower chargers, not the fast chargers like Electrify America and the superchargers. But I think clearly without a doubt, one of the factors behind this is all the automakers jumping on the NACS, North American Charging Standard, previously known as Tesla Charging Standard system.
Why, Mr. Shahan, are you referencing the gorgeous 2025?
Yeah, but I mean, even before we'll get to Honda, but basically, like when every automaker is saying, "Oh, our EVs are going to be able to use Tesla charging ports," Hilton's like, "Oh, cool. This is one charging station that fits every EV, including 60% of the US EVs at the moment, Teslas." It's just easy, and it's of course good branding for them to be associated with, a hot new brand, Tesla. And so I we'll just go rewind for 1 second. So this North American charging standard, when Tesla announced it, a bunch of us were quite cynical. We were like, "Oh wow, they just renamed their charging standard in order to get some money from the government, and they're making it sort of more open." But it was always like, "Oh, automakers can use it if they design cars that can use it and they contribute a bit." So the contribute a bit part got dropped, but all these other automakers started saying, "Yeah, our EVs will be able to use the North American charging standard."
But Tesla has been like this. Back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, they opened up all of their charging patents, all of their battery information. They gave those patents away license free. And I think they did that specifically for something like this, with something like this in mind. And I think the automakers, especially Ford, GM, Honda, Toyota, the legacy brands, maybe they didn't think that it was going to take off. They didn't think it was going to work. They thought they could go their own way with this other. They thought they could choose another charging standard the way that Ford chose gasoline in the Model T area. Because remember, before that, cars ran on kerosene, ethanol, stuff like that. Ford chose gasoline for the Model T, and
I am old, but I don't remember that.
Well, this is why you have me, because
this is why Joe is the co-host of this show because of his deep history. This is great info.
Yeah, well, one of us should know how the industry works. But no, it's true. This is how we got gasoline in the United States, was because of the Model T and Ford dictating that. And I remember, when we were sitting at Further with Ford in 2012, and I was sitting at a table with Chelsea Sexton, and they were talking about not dedicating themselves. They were not going to go full EV until there was a national energy policy that demanded it. They were hedging their bets with E85, flex fuel, CNG, all of this nonsense. So now I think they really thought that they would be able to choose a different charging standard and squeeze Tesla, and the squeeze came the other way, baby. Tesla squoze them, and now they have to go with this charging standard because nobody bothered to build out the alternative. Even if every car was CCS, if those charging stations are not out there, and if they're certainly out there, but worse, not working, not available, not working as advertised, everybody's going to have a bad experience. And we talked about this before. This is where all of these legacy brands dropped the ball. Tesla did it right, and now they're reaping the rewards.
I remember that. What year was that conference? That Further with Ford?
I want to say 2013.
Yeah,
I was there with Susanna Schick and Chelsea Sexton.
Yeah, and was Tina there as well, Tina Casey? But
if she was, I didn't see her.
But if I recall correctly, you told me it's something like, "Well, Ford's never going to invite me anywhere again," because you got up and you asked, like, "Can you just make a choice? Pick. Is this you?"
No. So what I said. So Alan Mullally was there, and he was taking questions. He was the CEO, famously former CEO of Boeing. And I said, this doesn't track with Ford's history at all. Henry Ford would never have allowed this. He would have come out, Henry Sr. would have come out and told the government, this is what we're going to do. You're going to back us. And if you don't, I'll take you behind the shed and beat you with a rubber hose, just like he did to Bill Jr. And
Joe,
Bill
this is
Jr. was
live.
there.
Remember, this is live, Joe. Careful where you
No,
go.
that's what I said. That's what I said. I'm sorry that's what I said, but that's what I said. And if I said it to the CEO of Ford, I'm not going to have a problem saying it to the commenters, which, by the way, disable the comments on these.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that it's just hilarious that was that far back, 10 years back.
10 years back.
Decade
later,
later,
we are.
Jim
And a
Farley's,
decade later, we've got the new CEO, who is Chris Farley's cousin, by the way, which I never would have seen that coming. But Jim Farley is a great car man. He really understands the customer experience and the need for this. And his decision to open up Ford to the North American charging standard, I think, is really going to benefit Ford in the long haul.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that just reminds us too. This is more of like a Chris Farley, David Spade duo, more than like a Conan, Andy Richter. But yes, yes,
you know your Spade, right?
Yeah, obviously. Come on,
obviously, we can all agree with that. Moving on, the Honda.
But yeah, I think we've talked about Jim Farley's kind of revelations, so to speak. Yeah. So we won't go over it again. But basically,
he's a great executive, though. I mean, we really need
100%.
more car guys in positions of power. We really need people who understand that what they are selling is not a commodity. What they are selling is an experience. What they're selling is a brand. For people who look at transportation like a commodity, they're not going to care what it looks like. They're not going to care about the legacy. They're going to look at mobility as a service. They're going to end up on Turo or something like that. For someone who's going to spend what is effectively a year's income, because the average price of a vehicle in the US is now perilously close to the median income. If you're going to spend an entire year of your life working for your car, it's got to be something special. And Farley understands that in a really, really critical way that a lot of people still don't.
No, I think Jim Farley is the number one automaker CEO right now. I think he's
absolutely
phenomenal. I always wonder, like, are his communications, is his style so good that I just get fooled? He tricks me into thinking he's like 100% on board and knows everything, knows how to direct this company, or is he really that good of a CEO? But either way, he's impressive. I love him. I think the way he talks, it's just it's very down to earth. It connects with people. Got a clear skill like his cousin had of how to connect with people, and he seems to understand the industry, and he just doesn't seem like afraid to make decisions like so many CEOs.
Well, I mean, look at the decision he made. Look at the decision he made to stop making cars. Ford. Let's make one thing clear. Ford doesn't make cars anymore. You cannot go into a Ford dealership and buy a car. You can't buy a hatchback. You can't buy a sedan. You can't buy a coupe, with the exception of the Mustang, which is becoming more and more dependent on truck-y and truck-like parts, right?
Yeah, even the Mustang, there's an electric version that's a crossover that probably will kill off the old Mustang eventually.
100%. Or start a new line of Mustang branded products, of like a Mustang SUV. We now have, actually, it's interesting you brought this up because Ford just announced a rally package for the Mach-E crossover that lifts it up, gives it off-road AT tires, a little more aggressive lights, some mud flaps. And I think that's going to be really cool, especially if you have like Pikes Peak fantasies and you want to go up the mountain. I think that's going to be great.
So Tesla put it on the table. I think it was like, 8 years ago. Any automaker who contributes to the supercharger network and designs their EVs around supercharging can use the superchargers. And of course, Tesla fans like, oh, would that clog up the supercharger? No, because they would contribute to growing the network. And and then the network would get bigger as needed with other EVs joining. And there was a time when he said some automakers were like on the verge of making a deal. It was a European one. So there, you could speculate, but it never happened. Right. And so you just sort of thought that idea was done. You thought that was like long dead. We had pushed for years. We're like, look, if you become the first, you're going to be seen as cool. You're going to have much better access to better EV charging. So Ford finally was like, Jim Farley on a road trip in an EV with his kids. They're like, why can't we use those superchargers that are everywhere? And there's a bunch of them. It's like, oh yeah, those are Teslas. So he's like, well, maybe we should just partner. And I mean, if his relaying of the story is true, That's what happened. And he was like, yeah, this is a big decision, but it just makes sense for our customers to improve their experience. So that opened the floodgates. Then tons of automakers followed in the subsequent days, like just days after. Other charging networks followed. But the latest one is Honda. So let's talk Honda. Let's shift over to Honda. This is the largest automaker to join.
Well, Ford and GM have joined, right? So this is
but globally.
Global, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But importantly, this is an important difference, right? Honda Global is not Honda North America. Honda's products in North America are not built in Japan. They're built in the US, they're built in Canada, they're built a lot of them in Mexico. Some of them in the past have been built in China, like the Honda Fit. But for the most part, Honda North America builds products in North America. And that's especially true now that they have that partnership with General Motors, where they are using GM's Ultium batteries and Ultium platforms as the basis for their vehicles. So at this point, it's kind of surprising that Honda waited to announce, because once GM said we're doing NACS, Honda's there, because they're completely dependent on GM at this point for their EVs.
Yeah, it's a strange. I mean, I'm honestly a bit confused about the whole series of events, because a bunch of automakers joined right after Ford, and it was like, were they thinking about it? Were there all these discussions going on behind the scenes, or could they just really immediately make such a knee-jerk reaction because Ford is doing it? I'm just curious what preparation went into these decisions, like how long these had been considered or discussed, or how much it was like, oh crap, we don't want to be left behind. And then it's just like, once there's like 7 or 8, it's like, come on, you're going to be the one automaker that doesn't have access to Tesla superchargers, or in this case, as we, these Hilton destination chargers, it's the same deal. It's the same port. So with, for anyone who doesn't have a Tesla, just to be clear, the charging speed is obviously much faster at a supercharger, but the nozzle is the same for these slower destination chargers.
I love the nozzle. That's a great I would have said the plug, but the nozzle is perfection.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, whatever it is, it just plugs in the same way. So all of these EVs that are adopting all these automakers are adopting the NACS are able to use these chargers the same as superchargers, just naturally.
Yeah, I think, again, this is what I was trying to say to Mullally in 2013. He wouldn't listen to me. Ford dictates where the market goes, and they do it because of the strength of the F series. I mean, if you really do some math and start to realize how many F series trucks, especially in 2013, 2014, which were like the peak years of everything. That was like peak Harley sales, peak Bentley, Rolls-Royce sales, peak Ford F-150 sales. I believe it was 2015. Something like 900,000 F-Series trucks were put on the road in 1 year. That is a staggering number of vehicles. If you start doing the math, that's like the GDP of a medium-sized country, and it's just one model lineup for one automaker. So when Ford said, we're going to do this, immediately anybody who's selling trucks or who has plans to sell electric trucks is in big trouble. What I am surprised by is that Rivian has not come out and said that they are going to do it. And I wonder if that's because they are now primarily an Amazon captive brand, but I'm waiting to hear more about that. Canoe, I'm expecting to hear some kind of announcement, but again, that's a Walmart brand. So I don't know if these companies still believe, because they're like Fortune 5 companies, I don't know if they still believe they can do it alone. But we'll see. And, maybe they're not even really doing it alone, right? Because Volkswagen, some of the European brands, they're sticking with the CCS globally, and they're not building out that charging standard for the US, which I understand why Volkswagen can't, but I'm not really sure about, Mercedes-Benz and BMW and those guys. I'm surprised they're sticking with the other standard.
Well, I've got some news for you.
I thought you might.
Rivian has joined.
They have?
Yeah, back in June.
Oh, I missed that completely.
So when did Ford? Okay, yeah. So right after Ford and GM. It was third, I think, right after Ford and GM.
Okay, so Ford and GM will bring millions of vehicles to the table, and
Um,
Rivian will bring
I knew
350.
there was one that joined before Ford, and now I was like, wasn't that Rivian or that was Aptera?
Yeah.
Which, yeah, but
I
but among automakers that produce vehicles today, and for sure in the
I
future,
gotta stop this because like I really like Aptera. I think
I
they're
do
good
too.
guys.
I
I think it's
just
a neat concept, but like there was one in Long Beach the last time I was out there, and they had it there, and it was driving around, and it looked real. And they were talking about the
it
solar
looked
panels. No, listen. They were talking about the solar panels on the roof that were integrated in the car, and I was like, "That's paint. Like it didn't have a solar panel on the roof. It was painted to look like a solar panel." And I was like, I know it's a prototype and I know it's a concept, but like you can't show that to people. They're not going to understand that it's not real. And the few people that realize that it's a painted on, they're just going to go run online and say that it's a fake thing and that it's a scam deal. And I certainly don't think that's true of Aptera. I'm the last person to ever call them another Elio, but like
and
you
you call
can't
it
do
out when you
that.
see it. You called out Elo for like years.
Oh, from day one,
Yeah,
because
so
they announced on day one, they announced their plan, and their whole thing was a total scam. And I
well,
knew it from day one. I published it from day one, and then they gave me a bunch of money to write something else, and I did.
well, look, with if they, I mean, they want to do what they want to do. Aptera, the Aptera team,
Yeah,
the Aptera folks. I think they're genuinely want to do it. Whether that's a practical thing they can make it into a profitable business, that's the valley of death. So that's what they're up against. So let's move on from that. But yeah, so Rivian joined right after Ford and GM and Aptera. And Aptera was the leader, not Ford, but nobody paid attention until Ford did. But this,
Aptera still doesn't have a car.
yeah. So,
I can the JoJo Mobile also is on the NACS.
oh yeah, the Zach Mobile as well. But no,
Zach
they're
Mobile is so much better.
way further along, much more serious than me. But yeah, so that's the situation. I don't know if there's anything more to say on Honda. The one thing that look, well, there's a few things. So I mean, one thing that comes to mind, if
The
you go to
one thing
Tesla,
I'm going to say is three things.
is this if you go to Tesla supercharger site, they've got 50,000 plus superchargers globally. It's not dominant in Europe or China like it is in the US. It's not. There are chargers you can use, but in Europe, for example, we have guys. I've taken a cross country road trip in an EV, but it was a Tesla. We have guys who have done every year. They've gone to the easternmost point, northernmost point, southernmost point, and westernmost point in Europe in different EVs. The Porsche Taycan, the ID4. So different, or ID3, I forget which one, but they've really, and every time they're like, yeah, the charging situation is not good. Like chargers are unreliable, networks
Right.
are all over the place in different countries,
But
especially
they
in
got
Europe.
it done. It
They
wasn't the
did.
experience that they wanted, but they got
Every
it
EV
done.
road trip has been had at least a few nightmares for them and other guys who have done EV road trips in Europe for us. So it's like, I just wonder sometimes, like, could Tesla get this kind of thing outside of the US? I mean, the difference is in the US, Tesla is like 60% of the market. In other markets, it's much smaller percentage of the EV market.
Mhm.
And EV market share is like really much higher than the US. So I think it's too late. But then I look at their network and I look at how much easier and more reliable and more convenient it is. And sometimes it makes me wonder
Yeah.
if it could stretch
But
that
that's
far.
because Tesla takes ownership of the experience. They are not leaving it to someone else. And this is what blows my mind about the legacy auto brands. They don't they don't take care of the buying experience. So they build the car. Great. You built a beautiful car. Now you're going to hand off the buying experience to a franchise dealer. And I'm a big fan of dealerships, and I support franchise dealers in a lot of ways, but the manufacturer has to control and train the people that are there. And most importantly, they have to control their floor managers and their desk managers. They do a terrible job of that. So you end up with terrible experience for a lot of consumers. Then they farm out the ownership experience. They farm out the charging experience. to third-party apps, so now you have Ford selling through a independent dealer on God knows what app, and then they're going to go through somebody else's charging network. And now they're so far removed from the customer experience that even if it's terrible, even if it's great, they can't take credit for it. And if it's terrible, all they do is shift blame. So Tesla has avoided that completely. Tesla owns the chargers. They maintain the chargers. They have reporting systems. They have everything in place so that they can ensure that their customers have a good experience. And that is the key difference with Tesla. I don't believe they have a product that is as good as what other people are putting out there in terms of the actual car itself. But every other step of the way, if I was going to put my father-in-law in an EV, it would have to be a Tesla, because anything else is going to let him down.
Oh, I know a bunch of people who are like just really unhappy with Elon Musk now. And they're like, I'll never buy another Tesla. What do? They went and bought another Tesla. But
right.
It's,
I mean,
it's
because
not
like
just, I mean,
Elon
not just
is not
one
Tesla.
or two people, but like several. Like this
Yeah.
is just the reality is, if you want and you know, you have a family, you want your family to have an easy, convenient experience with your EV,
and a
it's
safe experience where you're not
safe.
sitting on the side of the road for 4 hours
Exactly.
because you couldn't find a charger that was up and running.
And I mean, I'm in a similar boat. I would love to like support some other EV efforts, but it's like, well, anyway, we have a survey going on. If you haven't taken our survey, really key survey on EV charging. But I wanted to go back to 8 years ago when they invited everyone to join the party and nobody took them up on it. Back then, they only had so much money. I mean, it was like, they were still in survival mode. Like, can we become a real company? Now they're just sitting on, they're like, Scrooge McDuck looks like a poor person. Like, they're sitting on so much cash.
Yeah.
Like, they have so much money and they don't know what to do with it. And there's no longer any need to help to include anyone in the party. It's like, yeah, we'll build a network. It's the same price as other EV charging networks. They can always underprice any other network. It used to be a marketing expense as superchargers. It was just part of their marketing budget. I don't know if that's the case anymore, but clearly the case now is it's easy. And if you look at their quarterly reports, the growth in superchargers is ridiculous. It's enormous. It's really, they're doing it easily without even care. And they're going to have the best network by far. The thing I'm concerned about, if Electrify America and EVgo die at some point, and this is the only fast charging network in the US, can Tesla, double the price and be like, well, you got to pay because everyone drives EVs now, and this is the only charging network on the road. And
they can't do that.
Monopolistic.
No, but they can't do it. And the reason they can't do it has nothing to do with being a monopoly. There are so it's funny because this is the double-edged sword, right? Regulation is a double-edged sword. There are a ton of regulations in many states that severely limit how much you can charge as a profit for electricity, for what you can resell electricity. And in many states, you can't charge a profit for reselling electricity. You can charge a convenience
but there are
fee,
ways,
things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They could also switch and be like charged by the time.
Yes.
And then they can do whatever they want. But that's getting a really James Bond evil villain, which Elon wouldn't do that, right?
The notes say that you have to be nicer to Elon.
He wouldn't do that to fund anything, any side project like a trip to Mars. The news that we're not going to talk about today, but I will just announce it.
We're already so far off script.
I saw something on Barron's
that
he borrowed $1 billion from SpaceX in that right after agreeing to buy Twitter, which I didn't read it because it was behind a paywall. But I was like, did he really borrow $1 billion from SpaceX to help buy Twitter? Like, that seems not legal. But if it is legal, it's sketchy as F. Like, what the heck?
You can always get a loan from anybody, and a corporation now, because we live in
a $1 billion loan.
Yeah, we live in a late capitalistic.
Yes, we do.
Nightmare.
Okay, let's move to the next story. Joe, we killed this Volkswagen.
Yeah, go to the Volkswagen. So Volkswagen is really interesting, right? Because they announced at the IAA show the new electric GTI, and when I looked at it, I couldn't tell that it was a new GTI. To me, it just looked like the regular GTI with a funky grill. So, but no, this is the new GTI. It's behind Zachary there. It is a sporty hatchback in the same way that GTIs have been for the last 40 years. And I don't know, man. I think I'm really excited about it. I am a fan of the original GTI, but to me, it's gotten too big. It's just gotten way far away from the original Rabbit. And to me, the ID2, this is the hot setup. This is a much smaller vehicle, much closer in size to the original VW Polo or VW, to the VW Polo or the original VW Golf and Rabbit. And I think this is the hot setup with some sporty tires and sporty suspension. Make this the baby GTI, sell it in the US. And I think that'd be the hot setup. But what do I know? Zachary's muted again.
Yeah. It's funny getting ready for the show. We were like, wait, was that image shown the actual GTI ID, or was that just a GTI? And we were like, had to find it again and check. And I immediately thought, well, gosh, this is way too late to be using like the same car body as a gas car for an EV. Like this is totally 2015 approach. What's going on? And then you started to say, you can chime in with what your response was, and which then made me think more about it as well. I don't know. Do you remember?
No, I do, because okay. It's we talk a lot about branding on this show and how a company that has been building one product for 100 years, whether that's an internal combustion vehicle or in this case 70 years, how are they going to evolve into an EV? And your comment was, it's lame that they're making an EV look like a gas car. And I'm coming at it from the other point of view and saying they need to understand what the essence of GTI is, because they're selling the GTI based on the history of it, based on 45 years of marketing GTIs, based on people who are GTI fans who've owned 2 or 3 of these things. And when they market to those people, they need to give them something that is familiar enough that they recognize it as a GTI. And I think that's a real challenge that these legacy car makers are looking at. It's not a new EV company, a new startup coming out and calling it a GTI. They are building on 45 years of heritage and legacy. And is that heritage and legacy something that's going to help them sell more of these? Or is it something that's going to hurt them, where people who are quote unquote purists of the GTI are going to look at this and go, man, this isn't what I'm after. I want to have a VR6, or I want to have that 16V, or whatever they consider the pure GTI to be. Are they going to look at this and go, this is a marketing ploy, this is a branding exercise, this is not a GTI. The last GTI has already been built.
Yeah. And so that made me think, of course, that all makes sense, but also made me think, Volkswagen's got a lot of fully electric models now. They've got a lot of, they've made it clear they're going electric. You can choose the hot new innovative electric vehicle you want from them. And if you look across Volkswagen Group, that's an enormous selection of options. At this point, you have to pull in the people who are like a little more closed to it, who don't want a new model, who don't want like a vehicle that doesn't have any history. So in this case, you want to pull in the people who are like, yeah, I just want the next GTI. That's what I want. And it's got to be similar enough that I don't want a new model. I want a GTI. Like, so yeah. I think it makes sense. I mean, I think that I think Volkswagen's doing a great job. And I know they've got issues with their software and all that stuff. Like they're not the best, they're not a Silicon Valley company, but as far as model availability, model diversity, I think they're second to none. So it's impressive what they're doing.
See, that's a really good point, because you're right. They have their crossover, they have their smaller car, they have, in other markets, the ID5, the ID7 is coming out. That's a $70,000 luxury sedan that they're going to put right up against the Mercedes and BMWs and Teslas of the world. They've got the ID Buzz, which is the van, and now they've got the sporty hatchback. They really do have a pretty broad range of EVs and EV options. I don't know. I wonder how successful they're going to be, because I don't know anybody who's looking for a $70,000 luxury sedan who goes, Volkswagen's the place to go.
Well, I mean, we've talked about it many times. You got the Tesla approach, which is basically selling two cars and two Halo cars, the Model 3 and the Model Y, and they look almost the same. And now in my area, they're everywhere. So it's like the most common vehicle you see. And then you've got the traditional approach of, hey, model diversity. Let's make a lot of different bodies on the same platform. And Volkswagen is the one doing that more than anyone. I mean, others are doing it as well. But the one story you highlighted going into this was, it's not actually news, I think. I think it was just sort of reiterated with these recent announcements. But Volkswagen Group is going to launch 11 new electric cars by 2027.
Yeah.
So 11.
And one of them is the GTI. One of them is the ID2. Yes.
Yeah. So 11 new ones. Like Tesla won't even have 11 models by 2027. And so you're going to have what Volkswagen Group has right now, which is like, I don't know how many they have right now. Over a dozen? I don't know.
Oh yeah, they have a huge number. Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at the entire VW group, right, which is Porsche, Audi, you know, how many models do they really have? They've got, and yeah, exactly. Cupra now.
Even Cupra, which is like part of Seat, but it's like another brand. It's like
it's like Acura cool. Is part Cupra. Of Honda. 100%. But you're talking about a company that has, I don't know, conservatively 50 different models that they're making. Conservatively. I think it's probably a lot more than that if you actually start and doing the math and things like that. But I think this is a real challenge for Tesla. And I think this is going to continue to be a challenge. They have not yet, and again, early days, they have not yet been able to quickly bring their concepts to market. Whether it's the Tesla Semi that, unless you're Frito-Lay, you still haven't gotten your Tesla Semi, or the Cybertruck that they may have built 40 or 100 or 1,000 of them, but nobody has one yet, or the Roadster. We've got writers on our staff who have these things on order since for 5 years.
Paul Foss won 2 of them, I think.
Paul Foss won 2 of them. You think he's ever going to get them?
I mean, it's good he's a patient man, but I mean, at the same time, it's a big prize for promoting a brand you're already behind. But yeah, well, that's the Tesla Semi is, I think, my favorite Tesla vehicle. But I would I think it's noteworthy that, I mean, the company using it right now is transporting chips. So it's like
bags of the biggest salty air.
Yeah, it's not the biggest test, but I mean, it's starting. But yeah, I we've talked about this before, we've written about it, and we've had interesting discussions in the comments. And some people have argued that Tesla's got the better approach because it's more streamlined, more cost efficient, and they can continually underprice everybody because they sell 2 models that are very much the same.
But I hate that argument. The goal of life should we're going to squeeze every penny out of your operation and crush every single customer that walks in the door with the maximum margin and profit that you can get. I don't know who is saying that, but I think it's a failure of understanding and imagination to applaud this kind of approach.
Well, I think my point is just that we're going to see there's 2 very different approaches. We're going to see like how well they each work. Can Volkswagen put the EV future on the same system they've been using with Tesla here and everything? What about the Chinese automakers that are, rising up?
Yeah, China's coming to eat their lunch.
But the Chinese automakers as well, like BYD introduces new models all the time. So I mean, they're going more the traditional route of, Xpeng, Neo. They have a bunch of models. They already have more models than Tesla, even though they have far fewer sales. But then is that why Tesla does so well? Because they've just made everything so cost efficient, so streamlined. So they're just building on economies of scale that no one else tries. But yeah, in any case, I think it's exciting. I think there's a lot in cars people buy based on look and personality, and I like having diversity of options. So I'll be super happy when I see my first GTI ID on the road, just as I am with any new EV. I love seeing, like, it used to be you just see more and more Teslas. Now I see more and more Teslas, and I see more and more of every other EV. Like every light I'm at, there's another EV there. There's Teslas and there's non-Tesla EVs. Oh, so
Yeah, ton of
you're gonna
that.
slip this in before the lithium, huh?
Ooh, the new
It is
Lotus.
pretty.
So I have a hot take on this that I've been asked not to share, so I won't. But I will say,
Oh, go for it. I once you made the argument, I was like, okay, that makes sense. I just not a
all
fan
right,
of like
you're
it
not a
just
fan of
load
internal
like
combustion, and I get it.
no. It's just, well, there's that too, but it's just like I just am like, who cares? Lotus isn't selling any cars. They sell like such a small number, it's not relevant. The only thing they're relevant for is like inspiring thirst in young boys who want a sporty, expensive car. But yeah, so I'm just like, I don't care about Lotus. So I was like, I don't really care about covering this. And you're like, I think they should make gas cars. And I'm like, what? I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, what? So I definitely
Well,
don't want to cover it. But then you
first
made an
of
argument.
all,
I was like, that's a good argument.
yeah. So first of all, let's look at this thing. This is like a 900 horsepower, ungodly fast, spiritual successor to the Lotus Omega from the early 90s. This is one of the most crazy, ridiculous, Billy Badass sports sedans that has ever been built. And it's coming from Lotus. It's fully electric. It is built on Polestar and Volvo technology, because Polestar and Volvo own the Lotus brand and Lotus Engineering Group. So this is a halo car for the Geely automotive brand. This is the Lotus is the halo model to Volvo and Polestar, the same way that Lamborghini is the halo model to Volkswagen and Audi. It's that kind of relationship. So this is really the top car of that class, and it's fully electric. This is Lotus's first electric sedan, and I have a real problem with this. Why, you ask? I believe Lotus cars should all be internal combustion, and I'm going to tell you why. We have seen through studies that Volvo has put out, BMW has put out, that it takes about 30 to 40,000 miles of driving before an EV, a first generation EV, an EV made with first generation raw materials that have not been recycled, to be driven before they begin to have a positive carbon impact compared to internal combustion. Nobody is buying these Lotuses, these low tie, and using them as daily drivers. People are buying these cars for the track. They're buying them to, roll down to the club. They are going absolute maximum miles per hour, and they're not doing it in a daily driver sort of way. These cars don't see 40,000 miles. You can find Lotus Elans, Lotus Elises that are 20 years old all over Cars and Bids or bringatrailer.com, and they have 20,000 miles. I was looking at a Lotus Elan is front wheel drive, a Suzuki turbo motor, great car from the early 90s. The M100 body. I was looking at one of those that was for sale for $9,000, not too far from me. And that car had 11,000 miles on it. And it was like, it looked like it had an extra zero on the end. It was a little bit rough, certainly rough for that kind of mileage. But this is what these Lotuses are. To make this car electric is a marketing play. It's a halo play. If you're looking at it from a practical point of view, take this 120 kilowatt hours of battery, make a dozen 10 kilowatt hour plug-in hybrids. You'll burn a lot less carbon. You'll save a lot more carbon and fuel than you will by building one of these things, which is why I think it's worth talking about that. The answer is, BEV. I'm a BEV fan, but I'm not a BEV maximalist. There are situations where that is not the right tool for the job. And 900 horsepower sports sedan that's mainly used for track days, we can argue about whether or not these cars should be allowed to exist at all. I think that's a very valid argument, but the fact that they do exist, they shouldn't be BEVs. It doesn't make any sense.
And I'm fine with them existing. I mean, they exist.
They exist.
I think it's a very practical kind of engineering, scientific, straightforward or linear, which is not your typical. I don't normally think Joe linear.
Joe doesn't usually make coherent arguments.
You're not this is just how the facts are. I'm an engineer. You're much more of a outside the box thinker, creative. I mean, engineers can be too. But anyway, my point is that
I've met engineers. No, they can't.
I still think the biggest effect the car has is as a halo car, and being electric tells people, oh yeah, I want an EV, even if I can't get an electric Lotus. And I think that's why it's important to be electric still, because what if you're like, you're like, oh no, the future is electric. Look, these cars are electric, and the dealer's
Yeah.
trying to sell you on an EV, and you're like, yeah, but look, the Lotus is not electric. It's like, oh yeah, but that's because it's high performance. Oh, well, is this not high performance? Like, so I think
You make an
as a
excellent
Halo
point.
car, it's got to be electric. But at the same time, I'm very much, I see your argument. And if they made it, I mean, how are they going to make it clear? Like, this is cleaner as a combustion engine because
No, they can't do it.
nobody drives a Lotus for 40,000 miles, and they're not going to pull out. But at the same time, I see your point, and I think it's a good point. I think just factually, as one individual car goes, it would have less climate impact if it was internal combustion than if it was electric, because
you're not going to get the miles out of it.
Because of
But
what you
this
said.
goes back to a marketing and branding perspective. We start this conversation with branding with the Volkswagens. We're going to end it with branding again, because I remember having this conversation with a Chrysler executive when I was first in the business. I was at Bob Wilson Dodge out of Tampa, and they sent us to a class about how to sell Dodge cars. And I asked them about the Viper, like how many Vipers you can do this and that. And they said, listen, the point of the Viper is not to sell Vipers. The point of the Viper is to sell more neons. And he's exactly right. You build these halo cars for marketing, and we don't really sell Lotuses in the US. We don't really see them. We get about 500 a year, and nobody is going to go, I'm going to buy a Volvo instead of a BMW because Volvo is associated with Lotus. Nobody's going to do that. But in China, which is really where the market is, you might buy a Geely because Geely is associated with Polestar and Volvo and Lotus. And something like this as a halo brand for Geely makes perfect sense. You're going to sell a lot more Geely sedans and entry-level Geelys because of this, because somebody's playing with this car on Gran Turismo 8 or 9 or whatever number they're up to, or, Forza 14 or whatever. They're going to be playing this thing on their Xbox. They're going to fall in love with it, and they're going to get the closest thing to it that they can, which is going to be the Geely. And I concede, you're right. They should have made it electric.
Yeah. So no, I think either way, both arguments hold weight. Yeah. So this was our attempt to do a short daily EV obsession vlog.
This is longer than the regular ones,
with 1 to 2 stories. But it shows.
I'm telling you, you have no idea how much I edit these things.
Yeah, no. So this one goes a bit long.
No, but here's the thing:
we're gonna
as
have
long as the
ones.
Conversation is quality, I don't know. I don't even think that's the right format. I know we talked early about making the format shorter. I don't think that's right. You can leave it in the comments what you think of this. I think getting deep into the weeds in the way that only 2 people who have been doing this for 15 plus years. We've been writing Clean Technica since before the first Tesla hit the road. And I think that's long before. So there's plenty of Johnny come latelys like Tesla Roddy and Electrek that didn't exist, for nearly a decade until after we came on the scene and paved the way. So if you want to talk to people
in 2012 or 2012 or 13, I was on a list of 10 most influential people in the auto industry for fuel efficiency.
Absolutely, I remember that.
Obama, Elon Musk, Carlos Ghosn, and several other automaker execs and a few other journalists. And it was based on a methodology developed at like Cornell or somewhere, Cornell University, like a very scientific university based on influence. This was going back to this was because of how we covered the Broder story when Broder was covering did a Tesla road trip. Anyway, the point is that's more than a decade ago.
But that's my point. And if you want to go even further, 1997, I'm working out of South Florida. We were building chassis at Mosler Automotive for US electric car that was using, iron phosphate batteries, similar to what the GM EV1 was 4 years before that car came out. So like there is nobody in the industry that has the breadth of experience in EVs that you and I have. And going into the weeds, it's worth it, especially if I don't have to edit it later. Just leave it live and we're done. This is great. I would listen to this.
Maybe daily and long is the way to go. But my point,
long and strong, baby. Long and strong. And
we have one more story that I think we shouldn't talk at length about, but we just want to sort of highlight. The headline in Chemistry World is lithium discovery in U.S. volcano could be the biggest deposit ever found. And it's just a big story on potential lithium reserves. And it's not really, I mean, I guess it was a volcano, but it's not like you look at a picture of it and it's like, oh yeah, that's a volcano. And it's like some volcanic, let me find the wording here. You can, I had it here in our chat, but we've had a long chat. So
I love how like we're talking to each other and typing to each other on the chat because we're mental patients.
yeah,
But no, it's a dormant volcano. It is what it is. And I really like the quote that you put in there, that if you believe the back of the envelope estimation, this is a very, very significant deposit of lithium, right? Okay, it could change the dynamics of lithium globally in terms of price, security, and supply of geopolitics. But so like, talk to me a little bit more. Where is this for people who just like don't understand what's happening? Where is this? Who owns it? Who's going to get, there's this great old saying from the turn of the 20th century about, the rich man didn't find the gold. He didn't stake the claim. He didn't dig the mine, and he doesn't pull the gold out of the ground, but by some weird alchemy, all the gold is his. Whose lithium is this?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. No, but I mean, we've got, I think, a dozen or more podcasts with battery, mineral, and mining experts on Clean Tech Talk. So we've gone into the geopolitics of this and the market many times at length. So I'm trying to keep this short, but the short of it is that 60% of lithium is mined or processed, at least in China, globally. And it's more of an unbalanced OPEC-like situation than OPEC with oil. And other battery minerals like are even more heavily centralized in China, mining or processing or both, like synthetic graphite 100% from China. So there's a big concern with as the auto market goes electric and we rely on lithium like we rely on oil, that there's not a really concerning economic or geopolitical imbalance. And so the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 has been a tremendous help in balancing things out more. The US has become a player all of a sudden. Stuff is started happening immediately after it was passed, and still you get big announcements. Europe was like, oh crap, the US was the laggard. Now we're the laggard. We got to catch up to the US now, as well as China. And so they had a kind of panic situation for several months. But the situation is, in this case, they discovered a ton of potential lithium in that green bubble on my, well, I don't know what side, right there. You're
doing a great job.
There's some, you can see some other bubbles where there's lithium supply. And here is a big green bubble where potentially the US could get all of its lithium needs for years to come and not have a situation where we're relying on some other countries that might not be friendly to us for lithium for the EVs we buy every year.
Well, just in terms of carbon footprint, whenever you're pulling something out of the ground and then you have to transport it, the transportation of it is huge. Think about this fact. We are burning diesel to transport diesel. Like there is a huge carbon sink there. And if we can avoid the trip of getting lithium out of the ground in China, process everything else, and then put on a freighter and then moved across the Pacific Ocean, which I don't know if you've checked, but the last time I looked, the Pacific Ocean was huge and you took a ton of diesel to get it over here. We are going to significantly reduce the carbon footprint of manufacturing EVs and EV batteries just with this. And then if you can get the raw materials here and you can recycle it here, like our good friends at Recyclico that have just figured out, and they've cracked the formula for how to get all of the materials out of the cathodes, out of that black mass material. Go and do a search on that for Clean Technica. That kind of thing, and Redwood with JB Straubel, that kind of manufacturing it, whether you're talking about manufacturing lithium or farming pigs and cattle, if you can grow local, eat it local, consume it local, recycle it local, it's just better for everyone and better for the planet. So I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah, and so just to close, I've cropped this image and re-uploaded it so you can see the red ones are hard rock, the red circles. So this is where most lithium is coming from right now, hard rock. This is volcanic sedimentary or volcano sedimentary. So it's not like I was looking, we were like, where's the picture of the volcano? Just like, do you have a picture of the volcano? It's like, Yeah, there's no picture of a volcano. Oh, I see. It's not really a volcano like, in Hawaii, like we think of a current volcano. It's volcano sedimentary. So that's what it's sitting there. That some big lithium supplies there.
Yeah,
So
so that's a
it's
lot.
just
So
it's a
green
great
is a
story
lot.
for the US. And there's
Yeah.
nothing really more. We'll talk about it more with some battery mineral experts and clean tech talk one day, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
For
Joe,
those of
any
you
final
listening to
words?
this, I was just about to say, for those of you listening to this, you want to go back and check out Clean Tech Talk, search for it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. And come back next week. We're going to do EV Obsession live again. And you're going to like it. Or if you don't, let us know in the comments.
All right. Peace out. See you.